Welcome back to episode 2 here on New York State of Sports. Keeler back here with you. Happy to have you aboard. On the show, we're talking, of course, Islanders, Rangers, Knicks, Nets, Yankees, and Mets of the Hall of Fame, St. John's City Hall, and much more. From City Never Sleeps, let's give you the takes that never sleep. It's going to be a great show, and we're starting coming up in just a minute. Thank you once again, everybody, for tuning in. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Buccaneer555. That's at RACK, letter I, Nader like a Terminator, and 3 5s. And you can follow the show on Twitter. That is going to be, we'll pull that up for you in a second, just because I thought I had that open. You can follow us on Twitter at NY State Sports IE. That's at capital NY State Sports IE. Be sure to follow along in the chat here on Spreaker. Happy to get your thoughts and opinions as always. So let's start in the NHL. And normally I'm not the guy you go to for hockey, but when you have a big story like this, we're going to talk some NHL. At least we're going to try to talk some NHL. And the big story here is in regards to Patrick Roy becoming the new coach of the New York Islanders. Lane Lambert fired pretty much a day after we did last week's show, which was kind of a surprise. But when you look on the surface, it's not too much of a shock. The Islanders had a recent road trip before the firing of Lane Lambert where they went 0-3-1. And this is a team that just needed a change of pace. And we'll get into it the NBA with the Milwaukee Bucks. Sometimes you have to make a change. It may not be the most popular. I think in the Islanders' case it is. Because you're bringing in a guy that has a championship pedigree. You have a guy in Patrick Roy, who everybody remembers as the goalie from Montreal and Colorado, 4-time Stanley Cup champ, 3-time Conn Smythe winner. Didn't exactly do great as a head coach the first time. He went 130, 92, and 24 in 3 years in Colorado. Only made one playoff appearance. That's a talented Avalanche squad. But he found some success in the junior league, 5 years in Quebec, and got to do a little bit of everything in Quebec. And it's sometimes when you take a break from one spot, you get a chance to learn in another spot, it kind of goes hand in hand. You tend to pick up different things that you wouldn't pick up your first time around just because you're so used to everything. And when you look at the mindset that Patrick Roy could bring to the table for this team on the ice, they're looking for more of an aggressive mindset on offense. Looking at 30-plus shots per night was the quote that Roy gave to the media a couple days ago, and so far through 2 games, they've kind of followed that description. 28 shots against Dallas in the first, Roy's debut on Sunday. And then a couple nights ago, 42 shots in a loss to Vegas. The Islander game they won in overtime. But if you're the Islanders, you need to find a way to play more aggressive because it's going to get everybody involved. If you're playing a lackadaisical, slow pace of play, it's going to get players bored. And we're in an era of sports where people want high pace, they want fast, they want action, they want goals. And in this case, you kind of need to get your defenders involved in the offense a little bit just to keep them in the flow of the game. Guy, for example, would be Noah Dobson, their young defenseman. This month, he leads the Islanders in points with 13. He doesn't even have a goal. So think about that. You have a player that only has doesn't have one goal, yet leads the team in points. That's a pretty weird stat because normally your best point scorer in the NHL would be your best goal scorer. You got 2 guys on the team with 5 goals this month, Bo Horvat, who played well against Dallas, and Brock Nelson, who of course is known as that foundational Islander player. And only 3 players with a positive plus-minus, Dobson, Alexander Romanov, and Pierre Engvall. But the Islanders have to find a way to play better defense. They have a minus 21 goal differential, 10 points out of first right now in the Metropolitan behind the Rangers, who are scuffling, 2 points out of a playoff spot. And they've allowed the second most shots in the NHL behind the San Jose Sharks, who are just dreadful. So you could tell a change was needed, and Lou Lamoriello, you know from his time in New Jersey, is not afraid to make that big of a splash. So they're going to go in a different direction. And credit the Islanders for actually figuring out how to get there. They're right now tied with the Devils, I believe, 2 points out of the spot. And they're a team that doesn't have the huge expectation. They don't have Ranger-like expectations. But still, they want to be a team that makes the postseason in a crowded Metropolitan Division where the Rangers are good, Philly's good, Carolina's good. There's a track record right there. And Lamoriello has a expectation of excellence that I think the Islanders are going to have to try to figure out. But Wa's the kind of guy that can kind of bring him a jolt of energy. And it makes the Islanders relevant, too. And we'll get into this later on. We do our top coach rankings by recognition in New York sports. And there's not a lot of recognition as well. Where you look at the New York coaches, and there's when we go down a list of names in terms of national popularity, there's not a lot there. There just isn't. It's more of a local spot. When in the past you would have very popular New York coaches on a national landscape. But Wa brings credibility. He brings more eyeballs on the Islanders. And that can only help a team, not hurt a team. Want to give a shout out Ralph Calise in the chat talking about how Noah Dobson assisted in all the goals and almost a plus every night and having an all-star year. Yeah, he's been a key catalyst to this team when you look at Anders Lee, Matt Barzal. Like, there's a strong foundation that the Islanders can bring. It's not as national as let's say the Rangers, who have the most recognizable names, but they have a good core. Now it's about bringing in a different voice to that mix that kind of left off where Barry Trotz did, because Lane Lambert was a guy that was known a little bit but didn't have the cachet that Trotz did. Wa kind of brings that. And sometimes you need that big name to kind of spark a team. Which then leads into the Rangers, who are limping into the All-Star break at the very least. They've lost 8 of their last 12 games. They've scored 2 goals or fewer as a team in 7 of them. And if you go back to December 5th, remember this was a Ranger team that got off to a red-hot start. First-year coach Peter Laviolette. They're doing everything they need to do. But since December 5th, they're 11-11-2. They have 6 players with more than 2 goals this month. Artemi Panarin and Vincent Trocheck have 6. But with Filipino's missing a ton of time, Capo Caco just getting back, Lafreniere has struggled. This is a Ranger team that has an over-reliance on their stars. They have an over-reliance on Kreider, Panarin, Trocheck, Zibanejad, Adam Fox. There's not a lot of depth. And I think if you're a Ranger fan, the one thing you're looking for is for Chris Drury in this front office to try to acquire some, but they don't have a lot of cap space. Like, you can't make that impact move. There's not going to be a Patrick Kane out there like there was last year, or maybe they go back and get Tarasenko as an option. But you wonder if this team peaked too early. They could still be a playoff team for sure, but they're not the team that was running away with the Metropolitan. This is a West Coast swing where the Rangers got a lot of bad bounces against Vegas, as Ralph points out about the West Coast swing hurting this team, and it can hurt everybody. I think that's true. My philosophy on West Coast trips for sports teams is just give me a 500 road trip, and I'm happy with it. Because you realize you're not going to likely go 8-2 on a 10-game trip. I look at it like as a baseball fan. Look at it from the Yankees or the Mets, for example. When I see their schedule, they see a 9-game West Coast swing. I'm looking for 5-4 or 6-3. I don't think that's a tall order. So you look at the Rangers, who started off playing very bad against Vegas. I know that Vegas got a lot of bounces their way, but that was not a good performance. They go lose in Los Angeles. They do get the win against Anaheim, where they rallied in the third period, and you thought that was going to be the game that sparks them, and they get a 2-goal lead against the Sharks after 2 periods, and you're thinking, okay, Rangers going to come home, 500 road trip. Yes, they beat the 2 worst teams, arguably in the Western Conference, Anaheim and San Jose. Then the Sharks rally and win in overtime. That's unacceptable. I know the Rangers got a point, and getting a point is great, but to have a 2-goal lead against, we talked about San Jose and how bad they are, to lose that game, you can't have that. This is a team that has a lot of veteran leadership on it. They've got to play better. And the problem for them is their offense is very streaky. They're either going to get 5 goals one night or they're going to get 1 the next night. There's not a consistent factor. They've got to find a way to get secondary scoring, and they have to find a way to play better defense in front of Shesterkin, who has not been the guy he was 2 years ago. Shesterkin's still a very good goalie, but when you take a look at the big macro landscape, he's not the guy he once was. Could he win you a series? Sure. But when you're playing against some of these top teams who get to the playoffs, you're going to have to score some goals. You've seen the last 2 Stanley Cup champions, Darcy Kemper and Aiden Hill in net. They're not exactly your casual hockey fans' goalies of choice, so to speak. Igor would be that. Has the potential to be that and hasn't been there. You can't go out and blame Peter Lavalette. Look, he's done a nice job. He's got the experience that the Rangers were looking for when they got rid of Gerard Gallant. But there's something missing. They do play Vegas at home tomorrow night. Then they play Montreal, and then the break happens. Hopefully the Rangers can kind of right the ship, get the final 2 games, and then go to the break on a better note. All-Star game, I believe, is next weekend, I think. So they'll get at least a breather there. Very quickly on the Devils, 5-4-1 in their last 10. They have a big 1-10 against the Hurricanes when it comes to the Metropolitan. Right now, Carolina is 3rd in that division, and the Devils are 4th. So they're going to need a big game there. There's not been a Devil, by the way, with double-digit points this month. Nico Hischier has the most points with 9. And that's to be expected. You talk about a Devils team that hasn't had Jack Hughes since January 5th. So there's not going to be a lot of secondary scoring the Devils are going to get. Again, tied with the Islanders. They're 6 points behind Carolina, which is the equivalent, if you're new to the NHL, kind of a 3-game deficit. And in terms of the wild card, Devils and Islanders 2 points behind the Red Wings for the final spot. At 53 points is Detroit. Tampa's got 55. New Jersey has Carolina and Tampa Bay to end their first half. As far as the Islanders, they are at Montreal tonight. 7 o'clock face-off. And then Saturday, they are home to Carolina. And then I believe that's it for the locals until the break. Just going to get a quick look. It is. So 2 games left for each local team before they get a week off, and then we can kind of reassess things from there. We'll see how Patrick Wallace does in his return to Montreal. I believe he's his second return, being that he coached there in Colorado, but should be a lot of fun. Just want to remind you that this show and all of our shows here at IE Sports Radio are brought to you by Planet Jerky Premium Brisket Beef Jerky. Planet Jerky is the official jerky of the 2022 California League champion Lake Elsinore Storm, which is a single affiliate of the San Diego Padres. This all-brisket jerky has gluten-free options, contains no MSG, no sodium nitrate, low in sugar, and high in protein. Planet Jerky, the jerky that's on a whole other planet. Which leads me to this question for all you guys out there listening. What is your favorite minor league team nickname? I'm someone who's, if you're now familiar with my background as you get to know me here on the show, I covered the Staten Island Yankees for Pinstripe Prospects, which was then the New York Penn League team, like the guys who get drafted and then get their first taste of professional baseball. So I love minor league team names. My favorite one is probably the Rocket City Trash Pandas. Just the fact that you can call a team of Trash Pandas is pretty cool to me. I do not have their merch, nor do I expect them to send me any merch. But that is still a really cool name and a very cool logo to boot. So we're going to take our first break. We're going to come back, and then we're going to get into the NBA. And if you're familiar with a classic novel by Charles Dickens, you'll get the theme of where we're going with for the next segment. So stay tuned for that. You're listening to the New York State of Sports here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is New York sports.
What's up, Pittsburgh? This is Ralph DeLeese, the host of the Injury Report on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. Are you that passionate, diehard Steelers, Penguins, Pirates, or just a Pittsburgh sports fan, then please join me on the Yins Report every Tuesday on IE Sports Radio, the direct feed for all that is sports, and I will update you on all that's black and gold and have you telling your Pittsburgh fans and friends what's up with Pittsburgh sports. Tune in Tuesday with me, Ralph Calise, the Yins Report on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. Let's go!
What's up, everybody? This is Taryn Rodriguez. Are you a fan of volleyball? Are you a fan of Thunder Spikes? Then I have the show for you, Set Point, where I cover NCAA men's and women's volleyball, high school boys and girls volleyball, beach volleyball, and even professional volleyball. Catch the action every week here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Welcome to the 305, aka the Magic City, and this is Magic City Scoreboard. I'm your host, JB, and right here we're going to talk anything Miami. Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, Miami Hurricanes, Marlins, Panthers, Inter Miami, and even high school football. So join me once a week right here on Magic City Scoreboard on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed to all that is sports.
And that should be a great show that JB has here coming up later tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all those New York sports. Ricky K back with you. Of course, JB's going to be talking, I'm sure, the Terry Rozier trade for the Miami Heat. Scary Terry goes to South Beach, and the Dolphins losing Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator. Fangio going to Philadelphia. It'd be fun to see what the Eagles do with that, because they change coordinators like people seem to change things constantly. So Nick Sirianni's got to be in a mess right now. Going back to what we talked about earlier real quick, Gen B gave some team names that are pretty cool. The Indiana Mad Ants. It's going to be fun. And the Akron Rubber Ducks is actually a cool team. When I was covering the Yankees for Yankee Yard, we actually talked with the Akron Rubber Ducks announcer when the Yankees traded for Andrew Miller. So that's my fun Akron story. Going back, though, to basketball. And it talked about how the Knicks and Nets remind me of a Charles Dickens novel. That novel, if you haven't guessed, is A Tale of Two Cities. And the only line people seem to remember from that book is it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You never get anybody that starts to quote after that unless they've like a huge literature buff. Me, not myself. I'm more of a sports book fan. I'm actually been reading lately The Bronx is Burning, 1977 Baseball Politics Battle for a Soul of the City by Jonathan Mailer. That's been a fun book to check out. But you got one team in New York in basketball that's absolutely thriving, and the other one that's in an epic meltdown. So naturally, I'm a positive guy. Let's start with the positive. Let's start with the Knicks. If you're a Knicks fan out there, I get that you have these great visions of one day finally getting that championship the Knicks been waiting decades and decades for. I don't think this team is ready necessarily yet for a championship, but you gotta love what this team is doing. They are fun. They are getting after it. And what's amazing for this Tom Thibodeau-led team is they are doing the job against teams they're supposed to beat. What is the mark of a good team in sports? Crushing all the bad teams. The Knicks are 19-0 against sub-500 teams. Yes, you heard that right. 19-0 against teams with a record of 500 or worse. That's the definition of consistency right there. I think the only other team that has a streak that's even on that spectrum, just in general in the NBA, is the Celtics being 20-1 at home. To be halfway through the year and still be nearly undefeated at home, I think Boston's only home loss is to Denver. And what's striking about the Knicks is the way they've been able to adjust rapidly. Usually when you acquire a guy like OG Anunoby, you are going to go through some rough patches, some adjustment periods, trying to figure out how to play a new kind of style. Knicks haven't done that. They're 10-2 since the deal. And I haven't been on this airwaves since the RJ Barrett Emmanuel Quickley deal. Wasn't on to talk about it. For me, the Knicks were only going to go so far with Barrett and Quickley. Both good players, both part of a rebuild/retool in New York. But the Knicks needed to change some things. They need to get better defensively. They need to become more of an all-around group. They also needed a depth at center by getting Precious Achiuwa to kind of help out with Mitch Robinson hurt. And Isaiah Hartenstein's done a good job, but he's banged up right now. So the Knicks kind of had to make this deal. And the fact they didn't give up a lot of their draft capital in that with Toronto was big. Because now it gives Leon Rose and the front office a lot more to play with. Barrett, I think, had already reached what he was capable of doing, which is a very solid player. Quickly, the Knicks were never going to give a big contract to. The contract negotiations had stalled. He's in the final year of his deal, could be a restricted free agent. And I don't think they were ever going to match the offer sheet that a team this summer might give Quickly. And the Knicks also have a lot of depth at the guard position. But you look at a guy like Quentin Grimes who's even struggling to get time right now. So you bring in Anunoby, very good defender, and it's going to help this team when it gets to April, May, and June. Because that's the goal for New York, is how you find a way to get to that 4 seed. Right now, in the grand scheme of things in the East, the Knicks are tied for 4th with Cleveland. Cleveland's ahead by percentage points. Of course, the Knicks last year went on the road to Cleveland and beat them in that 4-5. But I still would want to get that home court. They're 4 games behind Philly in the loss column. But Joel Embiid's on another planet, getting 71 points. And you've got to think the Sixers, who have won 6 in a row, are going to get better at the deadline. I don't think the Knicks can catch Boston, Milwaukee, and Philly for a top 3 seed. So the goal for me is 4th. You have to hold off Miami, who just got Rozier, and I think has made their one big signature move at the deadline. You have to hold off a team like Indiana, who's shown some good signs, even though the Pacers have struggled lately since their big deal with Pascal Siakam. I think the Heat and Pacers are really the only 2 teams the Knicks have to necessarily worry about. Orlando has kind of faded since that hot start. Chicago's in resell mode with Zach LaVine. And the Hawks are trying to figure out what the heck to do with Dejounte Murray. So if I'm the Knicks, I'm keeping an eye on Cleveland, Miami, and Indiana. Those are teams I would keep my microscope on. But the goal for the Knicks now is, how do you show up against a really good team? While they are 19-0 against the sub-500 squads, they are 8-17 against teams with a winning record. And they get a big test tonight with Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets coming into Madison Square Garden. I'm not saying it's a must-win. There's no such thing as must-wins in January. But this would be a nice win to get. Keep the winning streak going. Get it to 5. You've got Jalen Brunson playing at an MVP caliber level this month. Julius Randle put up 30 points against Brooklyn the other night. There's a consistency and a fun atmosphere the Knicks seem to have that you want to keep those good vibes going. A loss at Denver doesn't really doom this team by any means, especially when you play the defending champs. Denver right now a half game out of the number 1 seed in the West, which, believe it or not, is shared with Oklahoma City and Minnesota. I'm just looking at that now, shocked by the fact that the Timberwolves are tied for the best record in the West. They have Karl Anthony Towns score over 60 points against Charlotte the other night, and they lost the game. Like, how does a team have one guy score 62 and lose. I don't know. Very strange. I think Devin Booker's the only other guy to have that happen to. But the Knicks at least are showing some signs of stability. And the least you could say for the team the Knicks are chasing in Milwaukee, the 2 seed with Doc Rivers, now becoming the coach after the Bucks fire Adrian Griffin after 43 games. Giannis is slowly becoming a coach killer. Because now you're trying to do everything to appease Giannis. So then why'd you hire Griffin? Why didn't you just hire Doc this summer when he was available? You're admitting you made the wrong choice, yes, and you're making this guy the scapegoat. But the Bucks aren't exactly terrible. They're bad defensively. But it's not like they're under 500. If Boston wasn't 20-1 at home, the Bucks would be the 1 seed in the East. And they have Dame Lillard. And they've got Chris Middleton. They've got a really strong squad. And you're scapegoating the head coach already? I'm telling you, for all the flack people give LeBron, you gotta start giving it to Giannis. If you're gonna make this kind of move, you better win a championship. Because that kind of stench follows you around in this era of player empowerment. But that's besides the point. We talked about the best of times, so we gotta talk about the worst of times. And that's Brooklyn, who is awful in the fourth quarter. You talk about a team that doesn't know how to win, that's the Nets for you. In January, they're averaging 24 points per game in the fourth quarter and shooting just 38%. That's lowest in the NBA. They're coming off of the disaster collapse against the Clippers, which it looked like things were going right for Jacques Vaughn. They got the win over the Lakers. I think it was a week ago. Then they play the Clippers, blow the lead in the fourth quarter. And then Tuesday, playing a strong game, Mikal Bridges is doing well, and you blow it in the fourth again. And you have Mikal Bridges saying after the game, it felt like we were the road team at home, which is going to happen. Knicks fans are going to flock to Barclays, largely because Barclays has cheaper ticket prices than Madison Square Garden. But that's still a chance to go see a Knicks game. And the buzz is still very strong for the Knicks more than Nets. It's never going to be a Nets town. But Brooklyn just is trying, Jacques Vaughn's trying different combinations. He's using Dennis Smith instead of Cam Johnson in the fourth quarter, which makes no sense. They do have Spencer Dinwiddie there. There's at least Nick Claxton's there. There's some talent with the Nets. But the problem you have is there's not a lot of cohesion. We talk about the Knicks being a team that's very cohesive, but there's no spark. There's no leadership there. And that's an indictment on the head coach, who appears to be, if not, I would think he's close to being on the way out. And the Nets have to kind of admit they made a mistake with Jacques Vaughn. I don't think there's a move they can make that necessarily saves their season. The argument would be trying to trade for Dejounte Murray. Right now, the Nets are a half game out of the 10 seed, which would be the play-in. They're actually chasing Atlanta, but the Nets, I would think their goal would be to get in the play-in game by any means. But with Ben Simmons still AWOL, nobody knows when he's coming back, if he's coming back. There's just nothing really, if you're a Nets fan, that you can really hope for, I think. Especially if you have a team that doesn't know how to hold leads. And as Taryn Rodriguez says here, Nets had no business allowing a 22-0 run dating back to Sunday. That's just poor defense. Absolutely right. And nobody plays defense in the NBA anymore. But that's inexcusable. And Adam Karnick saying, good afternoon, Ricky. How's Patrick Waugh being received? Very well. If you go back to the first segment, I think people are enjoying him, and we'll get into our New York coaches' popularity rankings a little bit later on. And shout out to Larry for hanging out in the chat as well. So you're looking at these two teams. I think the Knicks need to start buying, but you don't need to buy like giving up all your draft picks. Some guys you could look at like Malcolm Brogdon, Alec Burks. The guy I would want is Jordan Clarkson from Utah. I think he would make a lot of sense for this team. Just to give him that backup point guard, give Brunson a little bit of a breather. Clarkson can run the second team offense. That can work wonders. The Nets, I'm starting to shop. I'm starting to see what I can get. Probably not for Bridges, but I would kind of see where the market was going. Trade deadline is February 8th, so we're not that far away from it. But you have a Knick team that has finally found its consistency they've been looking for years, and a Brooklyn team searching for theirs. And I don't know where exactly they're going to find it. Remember, for the last 9 years, IE Sports Radio has brought you amazing content ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports cities around the country, such as here in New York. Make sure to follow us at IE Sports Radio on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok to keep up with the latest in sports and our shows. Or go to the website, iesportsradio.com, for our blog, Hall of Fame, Fans of the Month, and pages dedicated to each podcast, such as this one, as well as our community forum. And check out some merch. Thank you for making IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all that is sports. Matt in the chat says, is Mikhail the only untouchable for the Nets, or do you put anyone up for sale? I don't think Mikhail is untouchable. I think if a team went out there and, let's say, gave you like three or four first-round picks, and if you really believe that this franchise is far from contending, maybe you do it. But I wouldn't think anybody's untouchable on this Nets team, because there's really not a foundational piece that I would say is there. And remember, Bridges eventually is going to have to get the max, and you have to decide if he's worth that contract. They already gave Cam Johnson a big contract. How do you balance finding your core pieces while also realizing who's up for sale? Yes, and Adams puts out Zach LaVine is for sale, but I don't know what Zach LaVine a team would be getting. That's why I think if I'm the Knicks, I'm not really putting my eggs in the Zach LaVine basket. I think a team like the Lakers would be more inclined to do that, who's desperate to try to get something for LeBron James and Anthony Davis. I don't think the Knicks are in a desperate mode right now. I think they would take a good role player while trying to save some of those assets if they can make a move in the summer. So coming up next, we're going to talk Baseball Hall of Fame and why I really hate the process. And we'll get into some St. John's Seton Hall reaction, some big wins for the Johnnies and some tough losses for the Pirates. You're listening to New York State of Sports here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hockey fans, I'm Adam Kernick.
And I'm Zach Puplis.
Together, we are the newest version of Hockey Talk on IE Sports Radio, The Neutral Zone.
Zone.
We love hockey, but we also know it's not everyone's first sport. So we want to make this show as much for new fans as for the diehards.
Whether you can name all the Swedes on the 08 Red Wings Stanley Cup team, or if you can't tell if Varlamov is a goalie or the latest trendy vodka, we're here to help. With facts, figures, and outrageous fans, we bring you all the hard-hitting hockey news you can handle, while still keeping it fun and on the rails. Well, mostly.
So tune in every week as we go around the hockey world, from college to Canada, the minors and the majors, and everywhere in between.
So bring your cellies.
And your one-timers.
You wicked wristas.
And be sure to protect your five-hole.
Catch the Neutral Zone every week on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
We promise not to pick on the Arizona Coyotes every episode.
Well, what is up, Carolina Nation? This is John Felipe of the Carolina Cast, of course, the podcast of, by, and for the Carolinas, right here on IE Sports, your direct feed for all that is sports. And I'm reminding you to tune in Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern for the latest in Carolina sports, whether it's the Panthers that keep on pounding, the fly natures of the Hornets, the storming Hurricanes, the battle of the Blues with Duke and UNC, the fight of the Clemson Tigers, or the amazing atmosphere of any Carolina college. I'm talking App State, I'm talking ECU. I've got you covered. Once again, tune in for the Carolina Cast with me, John Felipe, Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
But right now, we're going to get into the Hall of Fame. By the way, shout out to John Felipe, 100th episode, Carolina Cast. They're going to have some fun time with the new Panthers head coach. But I want to talk Hall of Fame. 3 inductees going to Cooperstown this summer: Adrian Beltre, Todd Helton, and Joe Mauer. All good picks. But there's still some flawed process with the way the BBWA does things. I want to talk about Billy Wagner in particular. Great left-handed closer. Misses out on his 9th year on the ballot. 5 votes short. And C.J. Nikowski was on Twitter and he brought up a great point. You take 5 votes, right? 3 of them were 3 missed votes. 3 people last year had Wagner on their ballot and took him off. I don't like the idea of ballot strategy. I don't think that makes sense. Either a guy's a Hall of Famer or he's not. I get you want to try to keep people on the ballot or want to hold them off to get to year 4, year 5, whatever it is. That doesn't make sense. And two writers put just A-Rod or Manny Ramirez on their ballot. Like just A-Rod and Manny. Some could view that as, hey, I'm just going to vote for the steroid guys because I'm protesting the way that the Hall of Fame and the writers have kind of looked at the steroid era in general, which I'll get into. I don't view it that way. I think there are some that view A-Rod and Manny as very great players, which they were. And they think that now we're changing the standard of what we're doing with the Hall of Fame and putting in just really good players. Joe Mauer was one of the better catchers of the last 30 years. I mean, the guy won a batting title, won an MVP in 2009. You have Adrian Beltre, who was kind of the model of consistency at third base and had 3,000 hits. And Todd Helton is Mr. Rocky to me. Whenever I think Colorado Rockies, the one guy I think is Todd Helton. But answer me this. How is Billy Wagner not a Hall of Famer, but Trevor Hoffman is? Both have had bad postseason track records. Both have accumulated a great number of saves. Wagner not as much as Hoffman, but Wagner's still over 400 saves in his career. If you talk about a pitcher that people were fearing to face with the Astros in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was Wagner. And you look at his time with the Mets, he had 101 saves in 4 years in Queens, 40 in 2006, the year the Mets got to the National League Championship Series, ultimately falling a base hit short of the World Series. But Wagner had a good time here in New York. And he was able to at least thrive on that big stage, even though his postseason numbers may not be what you want them to be. You also have a guy like Gary Sheffield. Final year on the ballot, he misses. Sheffield over 500 home runs. He hit his 500th home run with the Mets. Had some time with the Yankees. And Sheffield was one of those players, fun to watch, and was put under that Balco suspicion. And for those who haven't heard me talk about this topic on past shows before, I'm a big proponent of putting the steroid guys in the Hall of Fame. I get it. They're already in the Hall of Fame. I get that it's a museum, and they're in the museum. They don't have to give them a plaque. I'm sorry. I can't dismiss what my eyes watched for the last 2 decades of my life. And part of me feels like you're ignoring the steroid era and trying to make it seem like it didn't exist. But Bud Selig is in the Hall of Fame, and he was the commissioner during the steroid era. Think about all the publicity that McGuire and Sosa and Bonds and Klein, all these guys gave the sport. They made the sport relevant again. And now you're going to push them to the side? Because you can't tell me that all of a sudden in the past, when it used to be 15 years on the ballot, that all of a sudden when Bonds and Clemens were on it, they had to change it to 10. No, that was not to get all the players off the ballot and create less of a jumble with players. It was to get Bonds and Clemens off the ballot. Fast. Because I think that the Hall of Fame knew that if you put Bonds and Clemens on the ballot for 15 years, that they were going to get in. And I think they wanted them off, get to the Veterans Committee, where it's a lot tougher to get on the Veterans Committee than it does the Hall of Fame. I'm sorry, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens are the best hitter and pitcher of my generation. Those guys were dominant, both in past eras and in their current eras. When you look at Clemens with the Red Sox in the 80s, you look at Bonds' success with the Pirates and the Giants in the 90s, you can't ignore that. And you now have a case outside of the steroid era with Carlos Beltran, who, of course, is under the whole Astros sign stealing scandal. I think he's got a good shot to make it in the future. When you look at how Beltran did in this cycle, he actually did pretty good. He picked up a total 57% of the vote. That's 220 votes, just behind Andrew Jones, who you can't tell me he's not a Hall of Famer. When you look at a guy that I hated hitting the ball to if I was a hitter in the late 90s and early 2000s to center, it's Andrew Jones. Probably one of the best defensive center fielders to play the game. And Beltran had his postseason success with Houston, played well at the Mets. I think lived up to that contract. You could argue here in the chat, if you're a Mets fan, that you always hold the Game 7 called strike 3 against him. It's hard to. It really is hard to. The guy basically lived up to every part of that contract the Mets could have asked him. Honestly deserved a better shot at being the Met manager. Never got that because of what happened with the Astros. But to me, I think he will eventually get in. A-Rod got 34%. I'm not sure if he gets in, but we'll see. I think the problem for A-Rod and Manny are the failed tests. Bonds and Clemens didn't fail any steroid tests. A-Rod and Manny did. David Wright stays on the ballot, which is great. 6% of the vote his first time around. I think Wright deserves to at least get more recognition. Of course, injuries wrecked his career and could have been potentially a Hall of Fame track. K-Rod, former Met closer, is at 8%. He stays on the ballot. Andy Pettitte, 13.5%. I think Andy Pettitte is one of the best postseason pitchers of the generation, but tied to HGH. And Pettitte didn't exactly have great regular season numbers, which hurts him there. Wagner should get in next year, along with Ichiro. I've seen people make the argument for CC Sabathia next year, who's on the ballot for the first time. I don't know if I would go that route. I don't know if I see CC in first ballot Hall of Famer, even though he's got numbers that are just really tough for people to get to anymore. 251 wins in 19 years. I think the strikeouts helps him, finishing his career with over 3,000 strikeouts. I'm not saying CC's not a Hall of Famer. I just don't know if he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think succeeding in New York and getting the World Series in 2009 with the Yankees helps him, even though he had a great track record in Cleveland. Won the Cy Young Award in 2007. Top 5 Cy Young Award finishes in 4 other years. Made a total of 6 All-Star teams. Second in the rookie year in 2001. But I don't see CC Hall of Famer necessarily. Time will tell, but I think at least Wagner and Ichiro are locks. And then going quickly into college basketball, St. John's, Seton Hall. St. John's gets a much-needed win last night over Villanova, 70-50. First time they sweep Villanova in the regular season since 1993. First time they beat Nova by 20-plus points since 1998. And they did that with a bunch of Nick Villanova guys there and Net Villanova guys there, and Brunson and Bridges, DiVincenzo, Archie Diacono. All those guys were there to watch Nova play, and St. John's finally got it done. 21-9 for Joel Soriano, who needed a bounce-back game. They got contributions all around. Their defense was outstanding. Nova couldn't make anything from beyond the arc. That was a game that Rick Pitino knew that he needed, knew that his experience-laden team needed. They had lost 3 straight. The vibe around Queens was not there. And they needed to find something to get some positive momentum going. And I think that's what last night's win gave them. They have a game at Xavier next week, and then on next week's show, we're going to preview the big matchup that's at against Connecticut at the Garden next Saturday. UConn will likely be number 1 going in that game. We'll get into the whole Rick Pitino-Dan Hurley feud and why that game is going to be a must ticket at the Garden and could be the game that maybe punches St. John's ticket to the NCAA tournament. Right now they're an 8, 9 seed or a 10 seed. I think they can get up a little bit higher. They don't have their bad losses, Michigan and Boston College, but they've picked up some good wins. They've got to get some wins on the road. And it starts getting this win against Xavier next week would give them the sweep over Xavier and get them that big road win that they could use. As for Seton Hall, tough loss to Providence last night. Kadari Richmond did not play. No reason was given as to why he didn't play. Shaheen Holloway, the coach, mentioned he had soreness, but didn't give specifics. Providence is a tough team. Watched them play against St. John's a couple weeks ago, and they have a guy in Devin Carter who's just so much fun to watch. Carter was somewhat neutralized by the Pirates, but that's a tough one for Seton Hall to lose, coming off with a triple overtime loss to Creighton over the weekend that could have really bolstered Seton Hall, who I believe was like 26th or 27th in the AP poll. And this is going to be a crowded Big East, where right now you got 3 teams that are probably NCAA tournament locks. UConn, Marquette, and Creighton. After that, it's a straight-up logjam for who is going to get in out of the Big East. You could get as many as 6 teams. Seton Hall's right there. Remember, top 5 in the Big East get a bye in the first round of the conference tournament. Right now, that'll be UConn, Creighton, Seton Hall, Marquette, and St. John's. And you want to get that bye because you don't want to try to win 4 games in 4 days. And especially this year, where anybody can beat anybody, but that rest is going to be so crucial if you want to make a big run in March. And then we'll get into Rutgers real quick. I know I've kind of ignored Rutgers on this show, but got to bring them up a little bit. Their last game, they lost to Illinois 86-63 last Sunday. They get Purdue at home, number 2 in the country, 1 o'clock on the 28th, coming up on Sunday. Zach Edey, we'll see what he does. Rutgers is known for some big wins at the rack. We'll see if they get it, and then they get Penn State at home. Purdue right now, though, toward the bottom of the Big Ten at 2-5. Adam Karnick brought up a good point. Steroid era is still a weird one for me. The guys were clearly juicing at baseball, so clearly didn't care at the time because it was saving the sport from being completely irrelevant. Yes, it is very weird, and it's tough to talk about, but that's why I find it hard to keep these guys out. For me, it's you keep them out if they fail the test. Bonds and Clemens didn't fail any tests. They were between Balco and the Mitchell report, they were implicated. There's no positive test really to go off of, in my opinion. So we'll take one more break. We'll come back, and we'll get into my top 10 coach rankings based on name recognition. I'm going to have some fun with this. So for one more break here on the New York State of Sports, here on IE Sports Radio. We'll be right back after this quick break.
It's IE Sports Radio. It is your direct feed for all that is sports. It is Philly Sports Talk with Cash and Chris every Tuesday night right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. Philly Sports Talk with Cash and Chris is the most comprehensive view on Philadelphia sports exclusively right here on IE Sports Radio. You know what it is, your direct feed for all that is sports. Tuesday night, IE Sports Radio, Philly Sports Talk with Cash and Chris.
Hey, Cleveland and Columbus sports fans, this is Jen B., host of the Show of the Land on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. If you love Cleveland and Columbus sports like I do, be sure to tune in live to the Show of the Land on Tuesdays, where we will cover the Cleveland Browns, Cavs, Guardians, and Monsters. We will also talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets, Crew, Fury, and of course, the Ohio State Buckeyes. We'll also cover other colleges in the area like Akron, Kent State, Cleveland State, Mount Union, John Carroll, Baldwin Wallace, Youngstown State, among others. So like I said, if you love Cleveland and Columbus sports like I do, be sure to tune in Tuesdays to the Show of the Land with Jen B. on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
And I'm sure there's a lot of happiness in the Ohio landscape over a certain Michigan coach going to Los Angeles and the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh, of course, taking that job. He should have some success there. And now Michigan, who knows who they turn to, but puts all the pressure now on Ryan Day to get it done next year at Ohio State. But welcome back. Ricky K with you. Last segment here on episode 2 of New York State of Sports. And want to have some fun with this one. So I want to come up with a list. Try to do maybe a different list each week. Top head coaches in the tri-state area based on name recognition. What do I mean by name recognition? I mean, if I'm a casual sports fan and I bring up this person's name, you're going to be like, oh yeah, that guy. Maybe I want the national landscape opinion as well as New York landscape opinion. So tweet me at RickNair555 if you disagree with anything on this list. I'll go 9 through 1 just because I always like to start from the bottom. Number 9, I'm going to go with Lindy Ruff of the Devils. I know he's had a good track record in the past, a long time in the NHL, but I don't think if someone said who's the Devils head coach, I'm not sure if a lot of people would really get that off the top of their head. So that's number 9. Number 8, Carlos Mendoza. If I mentioned his name as, say, Met manager, you might only think Yankee bench coach. So he's 8. Jacques Vaughn is 7 from the Nets. I'll go Peter Laviolette at 6 for the Rangers. It was tough with this one, mainly because Laviolette has a Stanley Cup background. I think the Rangers have a big pedestal standing in New York. But because hockey is not as popular as football, I went with him at 6. And 5, I went with Robert Saleh from the Jets. I think Brian Dable is slightly more popular in terms of the brand name than Saleh. So Dable's 4, Saleh's 5. 3, I went Tom Thibodeau. I think he has some recognition outside of New York. And I think in the New York area, he's not exactly a beloved New York coach, but there's not a lot of beloved New York coaches out there. When you think about it, we haven't had a title here since the Giants, as we talked about last week. So there's not a lot of coaches, A, that have been here for a long amount of time, and B, have racked up a lot of success. Thibodeau, at least, is starting to get the Knicks on a positive track, and I think the longer that Thibodeau does that, the more popular he becomes. So to me, that's why he's 3. I put Aaron Boone at 2. He's not 1 because I think nationally, if you brought up Aaron Boone, if he didn't have Game 7 2003 and the ESPN background, I don't think you get a lot of people with Aaron Boone. I think he's popular in everywhere outside New York. Yankee fans get on him a lot, and we'll talk about that more as the season goes on with any criticism of Aaron Boone, whether too much he goes by the analytics or not. But to me, he's probably the second out of the guys that have been here for a long amount of time. I think Boone has the most popularity and the most name recognition. And number 1, you got to go Patrick Waugh. He was the big theme of this episode. I think when you bring up Patrick Waugh to a casual sports fan, they know who Patrick Waugh is. They know him from the Stanley Cups. And that's why that hire was so big for the Islanders, because that's a name everybody's familiar with. That's a name that reaches the diehard hockey fan and the casual hockey fan like myself. That's where the name hits in. So any list you want to see, or let me know. I could try to come up with a couple. I might have one for the Super Bowl. That should be some fun here for give the New York landscape. But I will wrap up the show with one more topic with football. The NFL released their finalists for all the big awards that have the NFL honors the Thursday before the Super Bowl. No Giants or Jets made any of these lists. And the one surprise was Breece Hall not being a finalist for Comeback Player of the Year. To me, that's ridiculous. When you have a guy like Hall, who rushed for almost 1,000 yards, coming back from an ACL, and he tweeted today, "Everything will come full circle. I don't discredit anyone, and I'm happy for everyone up for the award. Never been the type to hate. I'll get mine. Just wait." With the peace emoji, and fingers crossed emoji, and the hourglass emoji. But let's look at the finalists for the award. Now, I'm not saying Breece Hall should win the award, but I want to get into who I think. Anybody would say, Ricky, if you think Hall should be up there, who are you taking out? So let's look at the list. Your nominees are Damar Hamlin, who I think will win the award, Joe Flacco, Baker Mayfield, Matthew Stafford, Tua. Tua came back from the concussion scare. I could see why he's on this list. Joe Flacco came back from his couch. But that story was just great to see the Browns make the playoffs using 7,000 different quarterbacks. I think the ghost of Bernie Kosar was like 8th on the depth chart. So there's a shot there. To me, the questionable one for a finalist is Matthew Stafford. Stafford did only play 9 games last year, but the Rams were also 3-6 when he left last year, and they were 3-6 this year until they won a bunch of games in a row to end the year. I think Stafford had a good year. I don't think Stafford had a great year. I could keep Baker Mayfield on this list because Mayfield went from almost being irrelevant until the Ram comeback against Vegas when he only had like 3 days to learn the playbook last year, to being the starter in Tampa Bay and leading the Bucs to a division title and a playoff win. So for me, I'm taking Matt Stafford out and putting Breece Hall in. Do I think Breece Hall would the award? Absolutely not. But I think Breece Hall should at least be a finalist for coming off of that brutal injury that he had to get right up there. Very quickly, I'll give you my picks for the conference championship weekend. I like the Ravens over the Chiefs. I know it's tough to pick against Patrick Mahomes, but to me, Lamar Jackson, he's got the perfect mix of that running game and the deep threat. The problem was the Bills got lulled to sleep by the Chiefs defense. Josh Allen was trying to throw over the top because he got bored in the fourth quarter. Steph Diggs was dropping passes. They kept going for the home run ball in the fourth quarter rather than the dump off that would have led to the game-tying field goal. I think the Ravens can run the ball with Gus Edwards, and Lamar can get downfield with Odell, and maybe you see Mark Andrews this week, but you have a good combo with him and Likely. Zay Flowers could be that screen guy / deep threat. And I think Lamar's ability to run the ball. We saw Josh Allen run on the Chiefs defense last week. I think Lamar can do that here. Ravens get their first home AFC Championship game. Ray Lewis will be there. Ed Reed will be there. The place will be electric. As great as Patrick Mahomes is capable of being, and the fact they've been in 6 straight AFC Championships is huge, I'm picking the Ravens. And I'm picking the Lions over the Niners. I don't think Brock Purdy was that impressive last week outside of the fourth quarter drive to win it. Deebo Samuel is 50-50. We'll see if he plays. And if there's one coach that has the great underdog mentality with nothing to lose, is Dan Campbell. That's the guy that's going to get his team motivated, get his team ready to go. Lions will take chances on 4th down. I wouldn't be shocked if you see some creative trick plays here. Jared Goff has some good familiarity against San Francisco. No bad weather in sight, so you rule the outdoor environment out in terms of Goff's problems when he's not playing on turf. So give me the Lions and the Ravens in the Super Bowl, which would be really fun, which Taryn Rodriguez also has as a Super Bowl. He said, Lions will winks, the Niners are under the Kirk Cousins curse. No team has lost to Kirk Cousins and made the Super Bowl. Really interesting. I didn't think of that. It's a good stat there by Taryn. I'll make sure to check out his California show and his volleyball show. It's good stuff there. So that's episode 2 for this week. We'll be back again next week. We'll recap the championship games a little bit, get you set for the Super Bowl. We'll also do a little bit of Knicks stuff, talk about their week. We'll get into kind of an NHL wrap-up going into the All-Star break. We'll see if the Yankees and Mets, make any moves to bolster their bullpens. We get closer to spring training. We're like 2 weeks away from that, which is really cool. And I think at the same time, we will have some fun with anything New York sports. And of course, we'll get you set for St. John's and UConn. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Terminator555. It's at RACK, letter I, Nader like a Terminator, and 3 5s. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at IE Sports Radio. You can also follow the show's Twitter account, which is at NY State of Sports IE. It's at NY State Sports IE. Coming up later tonight on IE Sports Radio is the Magic City Scoreboard with JB at 7 p.m. Eastern. And of course, check out a great shows we have for you all throughout the weekend. Until next time, Ricky Keeler saying thanks for tuning in to the New York State of Sports. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we'll see you back here next Thursday, February 1st, for some more New York sports takes and opinions.